So when we think about grinding coffee, and in particular espresso, we're going to use espresso as the big case test for this piece here as we start. There's a lot of variables that are happening inside of what the grinder is doing for you, breaking down that coffee, breaking it down specifically into a powder so that you can extract with it, brew with it, make espresso with it, etc. We've found, again, in our years of experience, in our collaboration with Ceado, and in working in coffee shops and bars and different coffee programs, we found some of the parameters that really matter when it comes to grinding coffee is retention. So it's a closed environment, right? You've got these burst sets that are breaking down that coffee. What is happening to the coffee that stays inside of the grinder, right? You can only see what you can see as it comes out into your dosing cup or into your portafilter. How is retention, holding on to that coffee, how is it impacting what you're tasting, what you're experiencing, etc.? Weight, of course. We see lots of scales out there today, right? We think the amount of coffee that you're using to make espresso, to brew coffee, an extremely important variable or factor. That grounds temperature. So when that burst set is moving and grinding that coffee, it is moving some of that activity, some of that breakdown of those particles. It is moving all that energy into the coffee itself and increasing the temperature of the coffee, which is, of course, impacting the overall extraction, impacting the espresso extraction, and bringing something to that flavor dynamic of what you're experiencing. So grounds temperature, particularly what's happening in your grinder and how that is causing the grounds temperature to increase, that's impacting it too. Particle size, how that water is moving through that coffee to make that extraction happen, extremely important. And humidity, where it's happening both inside the grinder and as it comes into the portafilter or into your dosing or brewing device, also extremely important too. So we found that these are the factors, the parameters that really do impact what you're tasting the most. May not always impact your workflow the most, may not always impact your cost of goods or what you're experiencing on that side, but as far as flavor is concerned, these are what really kind of impact the most. So let's take a little bit of a step back as far as what's been happening in the coffee industry, and in particular espresso extraction, making lattes, making cappuccinos, making espressos in our businesses over the past 10, 15, 20 years. Let's identify that coffee machines have evolved significantly more than grinders. Yes, of course, there's a lot more kind of emphasis on that from a business perspective. Those are big companies. Those are big ticket items too. Usually one of the most expensive things you're putting into your coffee shop. And with that, other businesses that make espresso machines, they've made a lot of investments in that too. So coffee machines, particularly espresso machines, have evolved significantly more than grinders with thermal fluctuation ranges of plus or minus 0.1 degrees Celsius. So you can narrow it in so much more on what you want that brew temperature to be inside of your group head. And pressure fluctuation ranges of 0.15 plus minus bar, highlighting the current limitations of grinders. So they have these new introductions of variables, again, particularly in the last 10 years, whether you use them or not, or whether you prefer to have them as a set it or forget it moment in your espresso machine. Those are significant innovations happening in an espresso machine that have really impacted the ability for folks to dial in on flavor, to dial in on nuance in your coffee shops, etc.
Well, you know, as we see here with the grinders and directing how it really works with the roaster is that, you know, roasters have done such a good job of getting great coffees from great farmers and being able to roast them at certain profiles with this certain taste. But where we've come in as grinder manufacturers or just grinding coffee, in the years past, we didn't do a great job. All we did, we thought we would just really chop the beans up. We didn't really understand distribution, we didn't understand particle size, and we definitely didn't understand how the flow of heat impacts grinders. And that was one of the first slides that Marcus showed. So retention and particle size distribution, as well as heat are three major points in grinding coffee. So one of the things today we will do is we will address that. And you say, well, how did you address it in these grinders? That is what we'll talk about. And I'll show you what we did.
And I think, as we go into point 3, most of the grinders that are out there, maybe not as much as some of the more innovative grinders that you're seeing in the larger specialty space today. But if you go into any shop, most of the grinders that are sitting on those bars are really only addressing one or two of those parameters. Mm-hmm. It's typically particle size, usually. Maybe we see a lot more grind by weight. And of course, it's just there kind of like, okay, the point of this piece of equipment is to break down that grinder so that I can brew with it. Let's at least get it to a particle size that you can adjust based off of how it's tasting and how you're brewing it. But really, that seems to be kind of what the grinder, especially over the last 10, 15 years, has mostly done for us. Like, hey, we'll make it a little bit easier for you to work with on a daily basis. But for the most part, we're just going to get you to a particle size that you can get something okay out of. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, number 4, and we talked a lot about it this morning already, coffee consumption is gradually shifting from a functional focus on caffeine or daily ritual to the perception of flavor as part of that experience. And thank goodness for the generation that's coming up and really encouraging this to happen. It's not, it's not so much of the flavored coffee and it's got my flavor crystals in it and I'm going to brew it the same way my grandparents brewed it day in and day out. Those are all very admirable pieces, but there's so much more emphasis on, I want this to taste great and I want it to be relatively healthy for me. And so I'm going to focus on that part of coffee more than any other kind of sugary experience. And I want to understand the coffee and how to brew it well to get that to happen as well, too. So from that, and from the experience and other kind of parts that are happening inside of the industry today, we find that the grinder from a commodity, it's coming from a commodity, again, just one kind of single function in your cafe, to being the master of flavor. This, as long as it's built well and you know how to use it, starts to become something that you can really get to make really great flavor experiences happen inside of your coffee, too. So we want to talk a little bit about, again, around the partnership that we have with Ceado and the approach that they have, that we had with them as we kind of embarked upon these data pieces, this project that we'll talk about here in a second. And so when they talk about designing flavor, it really is not just marketing speak. It is really understanding from an engineering, coffee professional, technical perspective, how can their equipment be best designed? How can their componentry be best created and utilized to get the best flavor experience out of that coffee? So with that, they have this idea that they want to create equipment that really shapes that flavor. They want to take ownership and honor their role in that from the grinder perspective and produce pieces that really help shape that flavor. They do that a lot through their burrs. Ceado spends just a ton of energy and time on not only manufacturing and creating their own burrs, but understanding the right burr geometry, the right teeth design, the right grinding pattern that they want to achieve, as well as the materials that they're using to create those burrs and any type of coating or anything else that they want to apply to those burrs. All of that can't just be gimmick or marketing. It has to be something that really helps enhance that flavor piece too. The grinder, as we've touched on, the grinder is evolving from a mere accessory, again, something that just grinds the coffee for you, to something that really contributes to those pieces, being the brain of the flavor. And again, you can make slight tweaks to really pull out more nuance in each of those coffees. And then that burr set is an integral part of the overall flavor design. And it's not just treated as this extra piece on the grinder that gets something done for you more efficiently and less efficiently too. It's really utilized to make sure that it can promote the best coffee flavors. So just a good sense of like how they start to present themselves as an organization, their ideas on how they design, engineer, re-engineer, remanufacture, and then what their goals are as a company. So they started with really looking at, okay, what are the leading grinders happening in the marketplace? What feature set do those grinders have? And understanding that piece, both from, again, the essential kind of pillars of what's happening, the things that they feel that impact the flavor the most, as well as the overall performance of the grinder. So we're looking at some particular test parameters here. And this is really looking at the overall kind of ground particle size of the coffee that's being ground. So we're looking at grind by weight technology, market leader. So really this is a Mahlkönig grinder that they're evaluating in this scenario. And you've got two different categories of grinds that they're putting into, grind size in particular. We've got super fine, so which is less than 350 microns, and then just typical ground coffee, between 350 and 1100 microns, essentially. That is the grind size that we're looking at. When we grind down those coffees, you're getting a range of particle size, and that's essentially the range that we're looking at. And it's important to kind of know what's happening there, because you want a balance of each. You're not going to get one particle size consistently every single dose. It's going to be a range of particle sizes. And to know how your coffee is being extracted, to know how to most impact flavor, it is important to understand how much of one particle size you're getting compared to another as well, too. So grind by weight technology leader, you've got a range in the superfine category of 5.7 grams, and then the ground coffee of 7.8 grams. And you're seeing it kind of displayed in the scale a little bit more, that there tends to be a larger range of these versus a shorter range too. So you're experiencing different particle sizes that can definitely impact flavor. It's not everything, but it is a larger range too. Climate control technology, this would be the Nuova Simonelli. This would be a 3.2 grams of the superfine and then 5.6 grams of the ground coffee. And then it starts to narrow in a lot more. So it's 0.4 grams of the residues present. Sorry, and I forgot to mention that piece too. This is actually what's left in that grind chamber. So it's not just what's coming out, it's what's happening between each shot of what is left in that grind chamber. So you're experiencing that, again, you don't know it's necessarily in there because it's sitting between the burrs set. And this is the amount of coffee that's actually sitting between those burrs too. So again, grind by weight, there's a lot of coffee sitting between those burrs. The Clima Pro, a little bit less, meaning it's moved much of the coffee out of the burr set. And then the E37ZB, which is barista, we don't have that model here today, but essentially, Gary, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what's happening with that 37Z barista?
Well, it was a technology that, of course, Ceado was the first one to do. And what the technology is we're grinding at a certain speed. And then at the end, what we're doing, we're reversing that motor for about 2.3 seconds the other way and sweeping that last bit of ground coffee out of the grind chamber. But the real question is, why did we do that? Well, just to point back what Marcus was saying a second ago, the average grinder up until 5 years ago had more than 18 to 22 grams of coffee all the time in the grind chamber. We never cared about that as grinder people. We cared about speed. Everybody wanted 2 to 4 grams per second, 5 grams per second is what they wanted, because they were just needing to hammer the grinder to get to the espresso machine. So we lost a lot of things that Ceado now has identified and said, we can do this and we can do it much better. Not only Ceado's done it, there's other companies that are doing it too. But this will prove what we're able to say today is how we did it, or how they did it, and how we want you to do it, and how you can understand it also.
Yeah, and it's not something that's talked a lot about in our industry today. It's one thing if you're very busy and your grinder is constantly moving. So that coffee, to some extent, is like moving through the grinder because you're going shot to shot to shot. But let's say we have a lull. We all have those moments where maybe we have 5, 10, 30 minutes between espresso drinks. We have to remember that there's grinds sitting between those burrs. Also, something to think about as a trend moves forward in the industry around the grinder communicating directly with the espresso machine and making automatic adjustments in that moment. It could be making an adjustment based off of grinds that had been sitting between those burrs that hadn't been touched for a while. So of course, the extraction is going to be different when you step up to that machine, and the grinder and the machine will be talking to each other thinking it needs to make an adjustment based off of coffee that's been sitting between those burrs for quite some time. So just all factors to take into play that highlight the importance of what Ceado is saying, that we're affirming, that we hope we're exposing everyone to, that the ground coffee that's sitting between those burrs probably has a pretty big impact on flavor, performance, etc. too. So the first use case scenario was 100 20-gram doses in 40 minutes, no extraction. So we're just going in there, locking in that portafilter, grinding 120-gram doses in 40 minutes. Stress tests, intense use of a grinder, probably not the craziest that we've ever experienced, but an intense moment, right? This is our morning rush. This is when, between 7, 8, 9 o'clock hours when we've got a lot of folks that are coming in, what we would expect a commercial grinder to be able to adequately handle on any given day with a wide variety of coffees as well. The two grinders in this particular circumstance are the Rev Zero, which we have up here today, as well as that market leader of grind by weight technology, using an optic thermometer to measure that ground coffee temperature once it exits the chute. And we're doing this in triplicates, so we did it 3 times over to get the best average that we possibly could. And again, that ground temperature, 100 ground doses of 20 grams in 40 minutes. So if we look at this scale, you're going to see a couple things happening here too. The Rev on the top, temperature of ground coffee here on the side axis here, and then the grind by weight piece as well too. What you're seeing happen in the grind by weight is that they're basically getting to the same point over that period of time, the same temperature of ground coffee. One grinder is getting there much faster than the other though. So when we look at those variables, the Rev is a little bit more of a linear elevation of temperature, so you can kind of be a little bit more predictive with that, whereas the grind by weight has a spike that happens within basically the first 20 minutes too. They get to basically the same ground coffee temperature, it's just one is happening a lot faster than the other pieces as well too.
Well, here you have coffee that is more of a friction point because it's much more coffee left in this type grind chamber. So that's one of the factors. The second factor is the way the grind chamber is positioned to the motor. It is direct contact to the motor. This particular grinder is separated about 1.5 inches from the grind chamber. So the transfer of heat is much more difficult. And then you say, what's your big transfer? Is the steel burrs. So that's the reason you're seeing people like Ceado come out with a different style burr that handles heat more, that handles not only heat, it handles wear. It goes twice as long as a regular steel burr. Now they make steel burrs too, but they also have come up with some coated type burrs. And we'll talk about coated burrs in a few minutes too. Don't get caught up in coated burrs that it's a paint-on solution. It is not that. Because if you had a paint-on solution, you can only imagine with friction, where does the paint go? The paint goes in the coffee through the water into us. So that cannot happen, okay?
So yeah, Gary's absolutely right. When we think about going back to this slide, what's left in between those burrs, yeah, it's in a tight environment where there's a lot of heat energy being produced, it's getting warmer and it's staying warmer. And likely showing up here that if we think that this is a really important variable, that coffee temperature is going to impact extraction, therefore impact flavor, you're coming out of coffee much faster that is already at a higher temperature. But both grinders are generally doing a relatively good job as far as like trying to control that as much as they possibly can as well. And the end result is pretty similar. So then we wanted to evaluate it at 40 18-gram doses in 1 hour. So slightly slower, a little bit more of like a nice, steady coffee shop pace. We wanted to also introduce a third grinder into this, which would be the E37Z Barista grinder as well. And we're also going to take each shot into extractions as well. So adjust the coffee grinder to have 3 consecutive extractions with an 18 gram in, 35 gram out, 30-second extraction for espresso, and perform 40 grounds in consequent extractions in 60 minutes. So a little bit more room between each set to be able to have that execute. La Marzocco Linea PB with the Omega basket, and looking at that ground temperature, the ground weight, and that total extraction time too. So when we look at the rush hour results with a full extraction, you're seeing some interesting things start to play out. The temperature, again, of the ground coffee, following a similar path, again, with the E37Z and GBW and the Rev Series GBW. Again, the E37Z following a very close line as with the GBW units, whereas again, what we saw in the first set, the Rev Series, performing better as far as maintaining that a lower temperature, especially at the onset of the activity in grinding the coffee. And then the weight performance. They're both relatively doing a good job with weight performance, being consistent with the amount of ground coffee that it is putting into the portafilter at each time too. The E37Z Barista actually has a little bit of a higher deviation on that extraction piece too, but generally I would say they're both doing a fairly consistent job at making sure that those doses are consistent between each shot as well. Mm-hmm. And again, what we're trying to kind of really open up here is what is happening, and we think what is impacting the extraction, the temperature of the coffee, ultimately the flavor, more than just the variables that we're more commonly introduced to today. Again, weight of coffee, particle size, etc. Anything you want to add to this piece?
No, and in the test that we do today, when we do the extractions from the 3 different grinders side by side, you will see there's 3 different burrs in there. So what we're seeing is also one has a reverse, 2 do not. One is a steel burr, one is a coated burr, and then one is a different type burr. You're going to get that different taste, but you're going to also get the taste because the grinders are new, also really new, for the break-in point. But the grinders just level out and it gets really consistent of what you're looking at. Also, it keeps those variables down of a lot of changes that need to be made versus most grinders. As I always say to our staff back, we chase our butt all the time on grinding because there's so much grinding inside. Not unless we're, like Marcus said earlier, we're consistently pulling shots. That is a great problem to have, but coffee shops don't have that type business 100% time of the day. So you got to have these lulls. So, you know, grinders were an afterthought until just a few years ago. Everybody worked so hard back from the barista competitions on getting these espresso machines to do certain things to make sure they were so stable. But they never really thought about the grinders. Now it's who can race to the top on the grinder technology now, because it's all so important. Because at the end of the day, you all, if you own cafes or you're opening a cafe, you should say to yourself that I want to see, my goal to be that every cup can taste very much the same. It will not be the same, but very much the same. So you've got to put in places of equipment that can handle that type scenario, because we know we all struggle with personnel today. That's just a factor. We struggle with that. So we need to take some of the hands away. So one of the things that Marcus and I talk about, not only about this, everywhere we go, is that it's like when I was talking to you today, one of the questions I always ask is, what are your pain points? Forget about the people that don't show up today. I can't do anything about that. But tell me what your pain points are on your flows in a coffee shop or in a food service event, you know? What are your pain points? You know, is it frothing milk? Is it tamping? Is it getting a good shot out of the espresso machine? What is it? The technology is there today. So there's no reason not to take advantage of that technology. You're not taking away the barista. You're actually enhancing their experience, and their experience with the barista should be focused on the customer. Because what do we want? We want the customer to come back. And we feel with some of the data that we can offer you and some of the taste that we can show you today, that you can do the same thing. If we weren't convinced, we wouldn't be doing this dog and pony show. You know, we really wouldn't. You know, we'd be doing something else. But we are convinced that this is the way the technology is going. Roasters are working too hard. Coffee is too good to waste. And that's another reason we're doing some of this. Coffee should not be wasted. So when we make changes on a grinder, we shouldn't be throwing away 5 or 6 shots. Just take your cash out of your wallet every time you do it and throw that in the trash can too, because that's what you're doing. It annoys me when I go in shops and watch shift changes and dial-ins. They do not understand how much money they just threw down the drain. It only impacts us as owners. It don't impact them because they're going to still get paid. So these are the things you really want to talk. You want to talk to your staff. Just be open about it. But we also feel like we have tools that can help you too. Okay.
And again, these are those variables that we feel ultimately impact the flavor the most. So if the ground coffee temperature is impacting the flavor, and the higher it gets, you're having a higher impact on your overall flavor. Bringing consistency to that is going to be up to the grinder itself. And while, again, all grinders are doing a fairly good job on dose consistency, we are seeing the spikes happen, we think, relative to where, and impacted by the amount of coffee that's sitting between that burst set too. We're getting more consistency on the rev from a temperature perspective, which we feel will ultimately translate into more flavor consistency versus spikes, more readjustment to the grind setting, potentially readjustment to the dose, etc. And so when we take that same test, that rush hour test comparison, 40 shots within that hour period of time, this is the extraction time that we're looking at for each of those grinders. So again, rev on top, 37Z, and then the grind by weight technology. You're seeing also those variables come into play when it comes to the total extraction of the coffee. You're starting to see like, okay, the rev maintains more consistency when it comes to the extraction. E37Z slightly less consistent than the Rev series, and that goes back to this piece too. Again, also demonstrating it's up here, a little less consistent from in comparison. And then the grind by weight, even less consistent, standard deviation of 3.0 when it comes to that total extraction time over that period of time, back to back. Again, we're tying this to the variable that we feel you're getting an inconsistent extraction, therefore inconsistent flavor, based off of the ground coffee that's sitting between that burst set not being moved shot to shot to shot.
We're also being very critical with grinders like that. These are the best grinders in the industry we're being critical on. So you can imagine some of the other grinders, from doser grinders that we used to really have a lot, just to time-based grinders. These are some of the most accurate grinders. So, and we're critical with this. You can imagine what the chart would look like on some of the grinders. But we're not here to embarrass any grinder. Yeah. We're here to say that how we can improve the workflow, how we can improve the taste by noticing these type things.
And again, there's not a whole lot of like reference point to what's happening to the coffee. Where is that coffee showing up that's sitting between the burst set too? on top of all the points that Gary just mentioned, flavor being primary, but also coffee waste, the amount of times you have to go in there and readjust a shot, redial in, etc., because you're getting inconsistent extractions happening. Then Ceado decided to do a post-rush hour test. So it's 10:30, 11 o'clock. We're not quite at any noon rush, but we're looking at 7 18-gram doses in 1 hour, irregular pace. So a little bit more of grinder sitting, not being used, espresso machine not being used. They chose to just do it with 2 grinders this time, the Rev Zero and the grind by weight technology. And looking at 7 grounds in 1 hour. And then the space of time between each shot that they're pulling as well, too. So same espresso machine. So of course we're getting some much different scales. Yes, the number of extractions that we're experiencing. But very interesting when it comes to thinking about what is happening when a grinder isn't being used. And in particular, what's happening to that coffee that's sitting between the burst set when a grinder isn't being used as well. So some good consistency on the Rev series as far as the temperature of the ground coffee coming in pretty consistently, and those extraction time scenarios. Again, we feel that that's largely because the coffee is being removed, not sitting there between the burst set, giving you a blank slate between each extraction. Grind by weight coming out of that busy rush hour, again, temperature of the coffee, and really having a pretty significant swing. And then, of course, that extraction time. And this is where it does start to get a little concerning that you have such wild swings in your extraction time when your coffee is just, when you're not using your grinder. So this starts to become really hard to control, and especially as you introduce software that would start making adjustments based off of what is happening at extraction. So imagine a grind by sync technology that's stepping in, you pull that next shot, and it says, uh-oh, we've got a problem here, or we're starting to see a trend. We need to make a grind setting adjustment at this point automatically based off of coffee that was sitting in the grind chamber and is now gone, and would start to just chase itself along the path too. So when you start to introduce some of these automations, which could be very great, not realizing that there's coffee sitting in between that burst set that is more likely impacting everything, is going to start to chase its tail in its catch-up of recalibrating that grind setting for the right extraction piece too.